your first Memorial Cup. Love to hear from you so far. How's the experience been being here in St. John, presiding over the tournament that's kind of the showcase of the Canadian Hockey League?
Well, first of all, thanks for having. Is this on?
Yeah, we'll turn it on.
Thanks for having me. Thank you. We obviously spent a lot of time prior to awarding St. John with the Memorial Cup, going through what was really important to the CHL in terms of what we wanted the Memorial Cup to be. And that was sort of outlined in the bid documents. And, when St. John came forward and put in their bid, you really hit it out of the park in terms of, we knew that the hockey tournament was going to be great when you've got, the league champions and a good host team, that what was going to happen on the ice was going to be great. But what we really were hoping for was a lot more activity off the ice. And, when you look at what the package that St. John put together with the Bash on the Bay and the speaker series they're at today and the legacy projects, the dedication of the ball hockey court and the cycling today with Kurt Harnett, like, you guys really stepped up in terms of, a great hockey tournament, but really using hockey and using the Memorial Cup as a vehicle to bring people together and to celebrate the great things that hockey can do for communities. So for me, that was when we went through the bid process, and that was what St. John was all about. To me, it was pretty obvious, where we wanted to go.
And just for the record, this weather it's like this every single day in St. John. Sherry, I'd love to maybe hear a little bit more about the role that you have currently. You've clearly been involved a lot in education and development of talent in kind of the sports marketing and understanding what that is. Love to maybe hear a little bit more about your current role and what you're doing today.
So I started the sport management program at Brock University, which is 25 years ago. And I was there for 16 years. And then I'm at Ryerson, which has a new name. It's called Toronto Metropolitan University, but very new. And I went there in a position established to the business school by the Rogers family from Sportsnet and Rogers Communications. And we do a lot of different things with the MBA program, but the biggest thing actually where I spend my most time is we have a lab called the Future of Sport Lab. And it's a sport tech incubator, as well as a research insight lab. So that's where we spend our most time. And our partner is Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. And we have, in addition, probably 75 to 100 mentors who are part of that program and part of that process. And we bring Canadian startups in the sport tech space through our community and through our internal accelerator. And then they go on to get contracts and deals with other large sport properties. And so we've been doing that since 2015.
Mark, executive search firm in the industry these days, is it an exciting industry to be in? It seems like there would be a lot of high demand for talent these days, and it's certainly an evolving industry that, as you would probably experience.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. I'll say I'm actually a New Brunswicker, and I also play stand, so I think I can have some knowledge here. It's crazy. The business has really changed. The difference that's really happened in sport, and I've done a ton of work across professional and amateur sport in the country. I'm doing work with the Edmonton Oilers, and then of course the Oil King won, so that was there's a connection there as well. But the business of sport has just changed so much because of the demands of what are required to run these businesses. And in most cases, that's financial. And for these teams, you think about the CHL, a lot of smaller towns or communities or cities, and it's how do you continue to build those businesses? So if you're doing it, how do you then attract really great talent? And that's what we've been, I'm a little bit on a soapbox on this because I think the big part about amateur sport is how can we make it better and how do we make it more professional and more sophisticated, because you're competing with so many other influences. Where banks spend money or telco spend money, they have lots of options. And it could be for a cause, it could be for a community, but hopefully it's sport. And so it's finding these folks is not easy, but it's the part that I love.
I actually wanted to pick up on a point you just raised, because you hear a lot of discussion or commentary around, like, I'll put quotes around it, but the old boys club and that type of thing. And I think, you know, one of the guys who seemed to change a little bit of the dynamic, or maybe the profile of sports executives, was a guy like Theo Epstein, where it became a little bit more common to have somebody who didn't grow up in sport have a major executive role. How have you seen the evolution of talent to be more broadly focused from just somebody who's been in the game, always played the game, then becoming management of the game, and kind of breaking away from that traditional sports executive that perhaps we had seen in the past?
Well, a couple of things happened. One, a lot of people just fell into sports for many, many years. And then as they got in, it's like, oh, maybe you should do this. And then, oh, but you're pretty good at this, so maybe you should do that functional role. That did not make them experts. And the problem is this business got really sophisticated. So all of a sudden you think about, well, who can do digital? Well, who's going to talk to the new customer, the new fan? By the way, ticketing, you used to just have a ticket. Well, now it's on your phone. I mean, you walk into stadiums and you're betting on your phone, and you've got fantasy teams. I mean, there's so many things that have happened in sport. You couldn't just take somebody that was in the business for 40 years or 30 years and go, oh, you could go do that. This is an expertise that is developed that you better go hire that talent, or you'll get killed out here. And it's really what is the biggest thing that has changed sport. It doesn't matter what level, quite frankly. I've done this at the amateur level, I've done this at the league level, and I've done this at the professional level. So it's every one of those organizations have had to change the type of talent that they're recruiting for their businesses.
But I would just add to that, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
You're talking about competencies and talents. I would just add the perspective to your question about the old boys club, that is the refreshing part of the industry. As we celebrated Title IX this week and 50 years of women making strides, that the industry still has a long ways to go, but it's more diverse in terms of gender representation and sexual representation. And, you know, and we're in Toronto. But I went to Dalhousie my first year because I appreciate you want an East Coast connection, and I'm going to have PEI after this. But the other thing is that it's really become multicultural over the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and that makes the decisions and the thought leadership to the executive table, I think, and we know the data supports this, much richer, and it's become a much more vibrant and accepting place to be in work. So I just will add that to your perspective.
Well, Sherry, maybe to elaborate on that a little bit, you're seeing now in hockey even, which traditionally this wouldn't have happened, but you're seeing some women have executive positions. You know, the Canucks have hired some, other organizations have started to hire some. NBA now has some coaching. What do you think has changed that is where there are now more opportunities for women in, even at the professional ranks in sport, and where do you see this going over the next few years?
I mean, there's so many great examples, and quite frankly, there's so many great Canadian examples, and Dan knows of them, and Mark. Canadian women just historically are on a rise in terms of even like throughout North America. I think there's over 30 female executives in the United States that are Canadian, in fact, in sport properties and organizations. A lot of those women who have ascended to that C-suite talk about allyship, or having someone in the office that's promoting them and supporting them and saying you should apply for this job. And it's not just women, it's just from any marginalized communities. Supporting those individuals to ascend and apply and start to break some of those traditional stereotypes.
If I can jump in on that too, I think there's been a real, as Mark talked about in terms of the skill sets changing for success, I think there has been a real understanding that more diverse front offices get better results. Like the old boys network of having a bunch of, people who look like you in all of the key roles, you don't perform as well. You don't have diversity of ideas. You don't have potentially the skill sets you need. And so, like at our office now at the CHL, we have 16 full-time employees. We have nine women, and we have some in senior roles. Like they're the best candidates. They have the best ideas. So it has nothing to do with their gender. It just has something to do with they're the best of the best. And so that's what we're trying to get. And you're better when you're more diverse. It's just the way it works.
And Mark, are you seeing more organizations seeking out those opportunities to have a more diverse front office? Do you see more talent coming through the pipeline that appears to be more diverse in the past? From the perspective of your role in this equation, what are you seeing there?
Yes. I mean, you got to think a little. I have to be careful here because this is a hockey conversation and a hockey event. But if you think of the two sports that are exploding in this country, it is soccer and basketball. And if you look at a soccer pitch or a football pitch, or you look at a basketball court, that isn't a lot of white guys running around, or women. And the teams are, the success that the soccer has had and the basketball that they're having. So I think I think the soccer community and the basketball community is also representing Canada. It's 100% sort of who we are as we're becoming as a country. This is not happen chance. I made a joke last night to Dan that the Toronto Raptors won a national championship almost 23 years after starting in the NBA. That wasn't, a bunch of incredible players didn't fall out of some trees. I mean, the soccer community, Alphonso Davies, there's 3 more Alphonso Davies in this country coming up in soccer. So we're starting to see in those organizations that are representing those teams and those leagues are 100% starting to diversify. It takes time. It takes time, but they are diversifying and changing significantly.
Well, maybe Dan, for your perspective on this. So you mentioned the Raptors, Mark. If you go to a Raptors game, the crowd looks very different than probably other sports that we see in Canada, and they've done an incredible job. And I know you had a role in NBA Canada and kind of probably oversaw that. What do you think they did well, and what do you think other sports can learn from them?
So I think from the NBA's, I think when I think back to my career at the NBA, and I was at NBA Canada from 1997 to 2001, and then I spent 1 year in the Europe office of the NBA, and then I left and went to TSN, and then I went back for 15 years. So I kind of did a few stints. And so I saw it in Europe and I saw it in Canada. They really were, I'd say they were very specific on investment. Like they were very clear on we're going to invest in this market. And so when I started back in 1997, I mean, hockey was by far the dominant sport. When you looked at all the metrics from Salmon Arm to St. John, I mean, hockey was dominant in every single market. And so what we identified as opportunity, there's a few parts of the strategy. Strategy 1 was we had to get games on the air on television. In 1997, 95, 96, 97, broadcast was, and still is, the predominant way you get into people's lives because it comes through the TV into their homes. So it was about media distribution was sort of step 1. Get the right media partners, have them promote you, work hard with the networks on getting highlights into, back then, highlights into SportsCenter. And this was pre-social media. And so media was number 1. And that was sort of the playbook across the world, do the right media deals. But then the second part, and it ties a lot to what Mark was talking about with respect to players, was really promote grassroots involvement. Get more players picking up a basketball. And so that's what we focused a lot of efforts on. So when I first started at the NBA, my first job, I had two aspects to my job. One was to run a program called NBA Hoop It Up. And there was a Hoop It Up event in St. John, I believe, in 2002 or something like that. I think it was the last year that it was run. But so I ran NBA Hoop It Up for about 6 years, and it was all about just getting people to pick up and play in a branded kind of environment. And then my second job was to work with Canada Basketball, the federation, to help them, sell sponsorship and run programs to get more people to play. And so you fast forward now, 2022, and you look at what happened in the NBA or in the draft the other night. I'm not saying it was directly because of that, but I think the impetus to have better development, especially at the grassroots level, to get more people playing, the system got stronger, better coaching, better pathways to elite opportunities. That kind of happened outside of what the NBA did, but we got the bottom started, like planted the seeds, and then as it grew, everything else began to sort of build on itself, and all of a sudden you're in a situation where, basketball is still not the #1 sport in Canada, but it is growing, and it's on the right trajectory. So.
And I would just say, you have to keep in mind, the CHL is the biggest development league in the world. So we've been doing this for a long time in hockey. We're just playing catch up in a whole bunch of other sports.
Dan, you made a reference to social media. Sherry, I'd like to get your perspective on the role that marketing and social media has played in the growth of sport in general.
You know, I mean, I think it's been fundamentally, it's fundamentally part of the business model of the business of sport and the sport industry. And I think with a commercial sport industry, I mean, in this country, we kind of have these two buckets. So this is how we teach it in school, the sports system, and then, the commercial sport model in this country. But fundamentally, I think we've gone through phases. There's a lot of ways to answer this question, but marketing and sponsorship has been fundamentally important. It helps drive the game. And for a country of our size, we have a really active partner community. And look at the banks, look at all the sponsors here. I mean, it's such a vibrant opportunity, and there's such a strong relationship between leading brands in this country and the properties.
What is it that you think about sport that is attractive to the corporate world? Because it is clearly a big spin for corporations on their marketing skills. Why sport?
So sponsorship as a business practice is obviously partnering with an entity defined, right? And using that as a way, if there's a match with your customers, to kind of match your strategic goals. There's other types of sponsorship other than sport, right? There's arts, et cetera. But I think 85% of the activation in the marketplace is sport related. And a lot of the reasons why I think that's so successful now, and historically, was because the eyeballs, you catch it in real time, you have this captive audience for 3 or 4 hours, 2 or 3 hours at a hockey game or basketball game. More and more it's becoming, and we saw this during COVID, if you look at the statistics and the numbers, partnerships in sport has become such a fine needle, because it's one of the only ways people now are consuming their activities and discretionary activities in real time. There's the Netflix generation, et cetera, et cetera. So it's still, sport has that, as a business partner, the magic of, the customers want to consume it in real time. So it's a good spend for your partners. You can make that much more sophisticated than I made it. But.
No, but I think it's simple. I think that's your bank. I think you hit one of the points, which is live, and so people, once the game's over, it's over, and people understand, who won and who scored, and so it has a shelf life. So live is where all the eyeballs are. But I think the other thing is, if you're an insurance company, or you're selling financial services, you're selling consulting services, right? You need to sort of try to link what your brand's all about with what people care about. And the reality of sports is people care about sports. People care about the Sea Dogs in St. John. They have a passion for it. And so and they feel good about it. So if you can it's simple. If you can link your brand to something they feel good about, you hope they're going to feel good about you. That's called consideration, and then you start moving down the funnel in terms of getting them to become a customer. So it's hard because you need to find the right way to do it. It's got to be true to your brand. But the companies who do it well see returns on sponsorship that they don't see in other forms of advertising medium, because it's the passion of if you can tap into the passion in a real way, you can have real business success.
Dan, wouldn't you say, I'm going to just ask him a question, but one of the big things about sport has been historically, and some people say it's changing, that community pride historically, right? When you look at sport in North America. So I would think in your new role, you see that in particular. The Raptors is about the country, but you would see that pride in place through that sport property and activation too, right?
Yeah, and that was one of the things when I came over to the CHL, because the CHL and the NBA are very different properties. They're actually probably complete polar opposites. So the NBA was about global brand, big media, global superstars. And the CHL is about community, and it's about being in 60 communities across Canada and the United States where the teams really matter locally. But nationally, the CHL brand is not at the same level as the NBA brand is, obviously, in Canada or internationally. So I think our challenge is to find a way to I'm looking at Trevor as I'm saying this, but continue to have the teams be strong in their communities and give them the tools and make sure that they're doing all they can to make sure that people in their communities care. But at the same time, providing an overlay of national activities, events, programs that also people care about and matter. And so I would argue that like the Memorial Cup, the Cup's not here, right? No. But like the Memorial Cup, people care about it. It's a national property that people really care about. I think top prospects game, that's a natural place for the CHL to have a place. And I think we have an opportunity as we go forward and as we come out of COVID to really challenge ourselves on what are some other things we can do on the national side that make our game more interesting and make junior hockey more popular across communities, but also nationally. So I think that's my challenge, and that's what me and my team and folks like Trevor and the leagues we're going to be working towards.
I would only just also say that it's interesting, if any of you watched the RBC Canadian Open, it was, like that wasn't fake news on television. It was crazy there. And I've done a ton of work with Golf Canada, and RBC and Dave Mackay said it, the best around sponsorship. Number one, it gets you very, very strong connections to your clients in a hosting opportunity like this or an RBC Open, wherever it is. Number two is you get even greater connection to your customer. But I think the most important thing that's even happening here in St. John, which is back to the community. In a case of golf, there's lots of philanthropic and money that goes back to the community, but also legacy. I mean, what they're going to leave after this is what actually matters probably even more than anything else. And that's the thing that's happening for a lot of these sports. They're putting money back into communities and leaving legacy projects that can go on for forever and ever, which is, that's where I think the power of a lot of these major sponsors are going. That's the magic, right? That's kind of the secret sauce.
Okay, I wasn't going to go here, but if you're going to talk about golf, I want to talk about the LIV golf for a moment. And some guys have been leaving the traditional tour to go for some big paydays initially, but over the long haul, where do you see a tour like that perhaps in the long run? Sherry, I think actually you might have commented on this a little bit recently. Like, where do you see somebody like that fitting into the landscape, and how do you see this playing out over time?
I mean, I commented in the perspective as a professor, and we were, there was a huge conversation about it because it really impacted the Open, the RBC Open, and all that news dropped 2 or 3 days before. My commentary and examination of sport and sport properties, and maybe what you're talking about. The other piece about this property is really how it's financed and how it's funded and what does all that mean. And we're talking about legacy, and that the thing about sport is there's this link with this social impact and responsibility of what you do. So I'm curious what the other two have to say and others, but it's going to be interesting. And then I was just reading on the way here in the last couple of days, now the LPGA is worried about what's going to happen to the sport and sport properties. And I think it's going to be really interesting. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that golf, and tennis are probably the two sports where it can happen. It's more likely to happen because the infrastructure costs you need to operate a golf tournament or tennis tournament aren't that great when you consider trying to build football stadiums or basketball arenas or hockey arenas, right? So I think, and those infrastructure. So if you think about say Middle Eastern money, getting the best players to come and play. I think that you would lose the local connection, which is so important in North American sports. You'd lose that if you because of time zones and live broadcasts. It just wouldn't work. But in golf and tennis, which are sports that move around the world, attracting the best players, if it is just about who pays the most, and your sport doesn't have that history and tradition of, I feel really passionate about playing it on this tour, then I think you're vulnerable.
I'll just tell you, I was at an event on the Wednesday before the Open, and I did not know this when I went, but Corey, they had a little sit down. There was 35 people, and it was Corey Connors, Mike Weir, and Jay Monahan. And Jay Monahan was about to push the send button because they were putting a tee in the ground the Thursday morning in England. So they tried to go there with him. His view is pretty simple, which is the tour is run by the players. Not run by the players, but the PGA, but they're all members. In professional sports, in general, there's an owner, and the owner makes the decisions. And that's true in almost all of the sport, the players of the association. In the case of LIV, it's now run by a person. So it's a much different model, and let's hope Bryson is correct by going, I want more time. I don't want to spend 40 weeks on playing golf. I want to spend more time. Let's hope that's the case, but it's certainly thrown a juggernaut in everything that they're doing.
Dan, you referenced one of your showcase events, the Top Prospects event. I'd be interested in your thoughts on promotion of individual players and the role that can play to creating stars, so to speak, versus promoting more of a team or a branded league perspective. Because you see the NBA's done that really well, where they've got international superstars that are known everywhere. Other sports maybe haven't promoted their individual stars as much. And do you think there's merit to doing that? Do you think it's better to promote the brand of the league or the team, or do you have a perspective on where to go with that?
Do you mean in my current role, or just generally?
Generally, but in your current role, maybe I'd like to hear that too, I guess.
I think you have to look at like in my current role, I think we got to be cognizant of the fact that just the reality of the way our players come through our league. They come through for 4 years. The top players really come through for 3 years, and then they're gone. So I think there'd be a danger to always be, listen, promoting our players, and not just promoting our players, but the good work they do in their community, their exploits on the ice, their exploits in the classroom. Like, those are all things that at the community level I keep looking at Trevor, but we need to do, and we do, and then nationally we try to shine a spotlight. But I think for a league like ours, I think what we're going to want to probably be promoting is, along with that, and along with the fact that the CHL is it kind of gives players the best of both worlds, a great hockey experience and a great academic experience, or educational opportunities in the future, is probably, again, that national event level piece, like promoting CHL events, and probably teams, like having the teams, really promoting the teams, because our players turn, again, as I said, a lot more regularly than in professional sports. And then the other part of it, too, is there's a really big difference between amateur sports, which we are, and pro leagues that have a players' union, right? So when I was at the NBA, and it changed right at the end of my tenure there, we had to deal with the players' union where we could use player imagery as part of, and our sponsors could use player imagery as part of deals. And that then, what ended up happening was, on top of the league promoting players, sponsors had the ability to promote players as well. And so, without having to do an individual player deal. And so that spawned a lot of activation that was promoting our players, but it wasn't being done by us, it was done by our sponsors. Again, we have a bit of a different model at the CHL because our players are amateur athletes, not professionals.
Sherry, we had Kurt Harnett here yesterday, well-known Canadian Olympian, and one of the topics of discussion that we had was how big the Olympics have grown, and the challenge maybe of cities vying to host the Olympics because they've become such a big property, and maybe the sustainability of that model. I know you were heavily involved with Vancouver Olympics and the marketing of that event. On the Olympic movement, maybe for a moment, what do you see as the current status of that, and then perhaps the longevity of the Olympic model as it stands today, if you have a perspective? Yeah,
so I wouldn't say I was heavily involved, but I did take my last sabbatical to work at the Vancouver 2010 Olympics in their marketing commercial rights management division, and did some research around that, and have since, with some colleagues that you well know, Dan. The Olympics are really complicated, and if you really get to the gut of it, and if you talk to the people, for instance, from Calgary, why the bid wasn't successful, there's a huge population, or percentage of the population that is, and those who are experts in the field, who are fundamentally dissatisfied with the IOC and the way they operate. And so, as a brand, I would not say that they have the same relevance or we have to host the games as they did 20 years ago. And there's a lot of conversation about that, and everyone has a different perspective, but I think that's why we see such a limited number of countries that are starting to bid for the games. It's very costly. There's questions about the relevance in communities. Now we're coming into, a very unstable economy. So I would say that where I see it, again, from that critical analysis of the business, there's a lot of criticism about the relevance of the games and how do they change and look different. I don't know if Kurt was talking about, so there's trying to reimagine what a games would look like, and this is what the current Vancouver group, in conjunction with the Canadian Olympic Committee and the Aboriginal communities are looking at, is how do we reimagine it and lower costs and keep it relevant. But there's a large, surging, very critical mass that are the Olympic Games relevant in the same way they used to be.
On the topic of affordability, there's a lot of discussion around the affordability just for an average family now to enjoy professional sport. Dan, I would say you're in a bit easier position for that discussion because the CHL is very high caliber, but more on the affordable stage. Do you see a situation where sport might be becoming too big just for the traditional fans to be enjoying it? And if so, is there a remedy for that? Or is this just the trajectory that we happen to be on for sport? That was kind of an open question to anybody, but.
You want me to try to take that?
Sure, go ahead.
So I think I think it's a challenge. It's a real challenge, and I think not the solution, but I think where it's going is it takes your mind to what does sports consumption look like 10 years from now? And I remember sitting in a presentation a bunch of years ago at one of the NBA All-Star games, and Malcolm Gladwell was speaking, and it was him and Bill Simmons, and they were talking about where sports is going. And it was Malcolm Gladwell. His perspective was that stadiums are going to get smaller because what's going to happen is fans are not going to be wanting to pay $100. Say we'll take a hockey game, a Maple Leaf game. What are the old grays like?
$100.
$200 bucks.
I was going to say $80 to $100.
So they're not going to want to pay $200 and sit in the nosebleeds when they can sit in front of they can put on their virtual reality headset and pay $3 and watch the game on VR, right? So therefore, if you're going to go to a game and you're going to spend the money, it's got to be a great experience, and so everything from your in-arena experience to the food has to be great. And so I think there's a danger, especially for pro sports, in pricing themselves out of the market without understanding how they're gonna deal with those kinds of issues, especially in terms of making sure that you're not pricing out your future fans. So I think it's an important point.
I would only just say people have options. Like, people have lots and lots of options. So you better give somebody or deliver a really amazing experience if you're going to do this. Because when you start to think about taking a family to a game and it's $500, that's a lot of money. And so you could go to a movie for a lot less than that, or you could go to a show, or you could do something else. So you better create value add that has never existed before. That's the challenge is. It's happening with the buildings. How do they activate in these buildings? And I'll do a whole bunch of things, quite frankly.
But I was just going to add on top of that. So one of the things we do in our lab with Rogers Sports Night is we have this fan index. And two of the biggest questions we get from sport is how do we better understand and commoditize sponsorship? That's always been there. But the biggest question we're getting today over the last year and during COVID was who is the next generation sports consumer? They're not talking about families, they're talking about youth and how are we going to keep them in the system as spectators generally, but also participants. I mean, you talk about basketball and soccer, but in the GTA, I see the baseball diamonds converted to cricket pitches, et cetera. So I think the biggest challenge is who is this next generation sports fan, Generation Z and beyond, and how and what are they going to consume sport, to Dan's point. And we saw over COVID, this generation, and I have two boys, 10 and 14, they're reimagining the sport experience. It's virtual. They don't have the same loyalty patterns we see as they did before. They very much want to be part of a community, like we saw in the Fortnite generation. And so I think that is keeping up a lot of sport organizations, and figuring out where the next generation is, in addition to everything that's been discussed. I think that's fundamentally important.
Dan, we talked a little bit, and you alluded to it earlier on. We talked about, for our opportunity to host the Memorial Cup, of course hockey is the main event, and it's always going to be the main event of this, but we wanted to make this a much broader event than just hockey. Do you see an evolution in the future where even individual games become much more than about the game? And as Sherry just alluded to, it's the fan experience and capturing much more than just ticket revenue from people that are going to watch a game. And do you see an opportunity for that type of model in junior hockey?
I do. I think that as junior hockey again tries to attract the next generation of fans, I think that's going to be a critical part. And so whether it be music or whether it be special packs, like I guess the question, and one of the key questions is what happens to the season ticket, right? The season tickets have been a real metric for teams in terms of how local teams, whether it be junior hockey teams or pro teams, in terms of how they sustain their business model. I think we got to be prepared to modify the season ticket, the reliance on season tickets. And I think part and parcel of that discussion is what value adds, if you're a team, can you add and or change the model on so that it's not just about going to a hockey game. And part of it, I mean, I know they've done it in St. John with the ice bar, creating products you can buy that are different than just sitting in a seat and watching the game, because that's not how the next generation of consumer may want to watch. So, and I've seen in other markets, Kamloops, where we're going to be going to the Memorial Cup next year, they've done the same thing. They took a press box above and turned it into a place where you can buy, like, companies, rather than buy a 12-person suite, can buy a 4-person half table sitting around the above watching the games, where they have a lounge service behind them, and they priced it in such a way that it's a really attractive option for local companies. There's a variety of different innovative ideas that are out there, whether it be in junior hockey or in pro. And the neat thing about the business of sports is it really is a rip off and repeat kind of approach. So just because even though the Sea Dogs compete like hell against Halifax on the ice, if the Mooseheads have a great idea in terms of the way they're selling suites or they're selling tickets, there's no reason why St. John can't take that idea and then modify it for this market. So I think that becomes the future.
Yeah, you actually made me think of something. I went to a Dallas Cowboys game a few years ago, and when I bought the ticket, it all of a sudden popped up about 6 different add-ons that you could buy. You could get down on the field for the anthem, or you could watch the players come out of the tunnel, and you could have a different dining experience. And a lot of it was actually interacting with some of the athletes, which is kind of an interesting concept. Mark, I wanted to get your thoughts on entrance into the world of sports from a executive or a management or even entry-level business position. I remember a few years ago, quite a while now ago, I had kind of explored the option. I had talked to a few people, and I remember them saying, well, you basically have to start at the bottom. Like, you got to go fold T-shirts in the gift shop for the Blue Jackets. And I was thinking, yeah, I'm not doing that. Do you think that has changed, or do you still think there's a little bit of a entry-level, work your way up through, or do you think there are now more opportunities to enter the business of sport at a more senior level?
Yes. I mean, part of which was my answer earlier, because the functional roles have become so specific and they're so critical to the business, we've been recruiting people out of multiple industries, and that's sort of become the norm, very candidly. I just did the chief marketing officer at Golf Canada, and she came from Scotiabank on hockey. So technically, what is she going to a property? So there's lots of ways to cross over. I'll tell you this, if there's young people here that want to get in the business of sport, I think it's always one of those things. I always remind people that when you think of the sports landscape, just even in this country, there's this, and I'm being funny when I say this because I say this often when I speak at MBA programs or something, there's Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment and beyond. And the problem is most people go, oh my God, I have to work for the Toronto Maple Leafs or the Raptors. And I'm like, sure, but there is incredible properties. There is events, there's leagues, there is teams, there is venues. It is incredible where you can actually get into sport that you're not working for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And that is the thing I say to young people constantly, which is, I have a thing that I can show someone where there's like 153 companies in Canada that are directly connected to sports. So don't just narrow it down to one. Think big. Think about sort of all the opportunities and how the business, I'm in the business of sport because it's competitive. There's wins and losses. We know who wins and we know who loses. So, and the business keeps changing. And that's the thing that's so attractive, I think, to young people that are thinking, how do I get into the business of sport? Think about ways. There is also 30 new programs in Canada where you can do sports business programs that I'm sure Sherry could speak to.
I mean, I would offer in 25 years of teaching that there's a number of programs on the marketplace so that helps and hinders students in the sense that there's a lot of opportunities, but the industry is getting pretty discriminate on advanced hires or hires into the marketplace. The other thing is the industry has gotten really sophisticated. I always say in my time, having the Olympics in this country and a global sport property, and then with the Raptors coming and the NBA, we have a sophistication in this marketplace that's acknowledged, rather throughout North America. And so we've moved beyond, selling T-shirts is going to get you in the industry and accelerate and give you a career that gives you a job for life. So I find the industry is looking for students to come in or mid-level people that have a number of diverse experiences from brands or packaged goods, et cetera. So diversify yourself, and there's a lot of sport management students out there, so do try to distinguish yourself and get some additional skill sets.
I would just also say, if you keep in mind of what's about, the World Cup of Soccer is coming to Canada. It's the largest sporting event on the planet. I don't think people even actually have a clue how big this is going to be for this country. And I think it will be game-changing for this country. I'm a 22-year-old coming out of school. I'd sure go, I have 4 years before maybe the greatest sporting event comes to this country, and I want to be part of it. That's just someone either goes, I'm going to go do that. That's what you have to go find those people.
If you're open to it, I wouldn't mind opening up to some Q&A from the audience. Maybe if they get a few questions. Maybe my final question, bring it back to hockey. Growing the game of hockey, do you see any current barriers that exist to growing the game, or what can we learn from other sports that we can do to grow it? Is it a grassroots thing? Is it a tapping into new media? Is it a technology, innovation play? What's your vision for the future of hockey and how we might be able to grow the sport in Canada even more than it already is today?
So I think we have to be clear on if you're talking about players or fans, right? So again, back to my NBA experience, it was about trying to build fans at the media side and then plant seeds at the bottom. I think hockey in Canada is obviously a very different scenario, and there's lots of different systems already in place that have grown up, right? So I think I personally think, and it's not probably a surprise to you given what we talked about with respect to ball hockey, that as you look at the changing face of Canada, and you're looking at where people are coming from, I think we need to remove as many barriers as possible for new Canadians to understand hockey. And I think that ball hockey, to me, is something we need to look at. I really, truly, as an opportunity to get people to pick up the game, pick up a stick, feel the experience of scoring a goal, of setting somebody up, like all those things that, if you grew up, when I grew up, I learned to skate when I was 5, and then I learned how to do that when I was probably 7 or 8, and it made me a fan. I think the process to learn to be a fan is different now when it comes to using the game. And then I think we've also got to, in terms of building fans, I think our teams, and we got a really great opportunity with 60 teams across, 52 in Canada and 8 in the U.S., to make the arena a welcoming place for everybody. No matter where you come from, what your background is, make it
I think culture is, I'm trying to answer this really politically correctly. I think culture is really important, and I think it's something that continues to need to be worked on in every sport, and hockey's part of it. And I think the inclusion piece, like Dan talked about, and I see my good friend, Brian McBride. I'm sure you all know Brian McBride, but the work that organizations like his is doing, and you wear many hats, Brian, but with the Carnegie Initiative and some of those opportunities to really think about inclusion in hockey is fundamentally important, and really head on address some of those issues, right, Brian? So there you go.
All right, well, we'll take a couple of questions if anybody would like to ask some questions from our guests. Any questions? All right, we got one right over here.
Thank you for taking the time to come and talk to fans. But I guess I was looking for if you could talk to, say, somebody who isn't even a child or youth, that's not even at the level of starting into the age group yet, like the seeds, planting the seeds, and you having children, and being cross sports. Is there anything that you, with wisdom, can kind of say, whether it's to a parent or a hockey aunt or something like that, that would encourage them to pursue what they would like to do?
First of all, it's not the greatest to hear, but I think essentially your question was about how do we encourage people to stay in sport as a career or as a player? As a player. Do you want to do that one? Player development in hockey? Do you want to take it?
I think at the end of the day, so I have two children, and my son started playing. At the end of the day, he's in karate. He likes karate. That's what he's all about. I think that's where it starts. Personally, like, take my CHL hat off. As a father, I just want my kid to be happy and to have fun doing what he's doing. I would have loved back in the day to have him play basketball or hockey or soccer, the things I played. He tried all three of them. He didn't like them. For him, he's an individual sport guy. He's now a brown advanced whatever in karate. Good for him. My daughter, she likes dance, doesn't like sports. So I think to me, that's the most important thing. And if your child is, the only thing I'd say though, and again, I don't want to give fatherly advice because I got some issues there, I'm sure. But the one thing that I've done with my son is just say, like, if you sign up, and my daughter, and we're paying for it, you're finishing it. So 2 weeks in, if you're not happy with your 4-month dance class, you're finishing. And then if you don't like it, we can talk. But so I think I'd be careful in pushing them, like, because what's going to happen is once they get into it and they like it, then it becomes okay. Well, how can I feed that passion and make it better, right? So I wouldn't worry too much about how to keep them in. As long as they like it, that's the first step. And then I think there's lots more opportunity to keep them in after that.
I mean, I think the one thing I'll just add is one of the other groups I do a lot of work with is Canadian Tire and Jumpstart. And I'm just saying statistically, we've lost a lot of kids during the pandemic to physical activity. And so I would just add, in general, that's linked to mental health concerns, et cetera, et cetera. So in general, their messaging is keep it fun, keep it safe, sport, and try to keep them in environments that are healthy for them to continue that path in the sporting experience. And so it's working with the child and the parent or guardian.
I would only say this is just my own experience. 2 kids. I'm sure lots of you may relate to this silly little story, but this is so I have a little girl. My wife signs her up for soccer. I have a boy that plays hockey. I coach. I spend 7 months in an ice rink. And she looked at me and said, okay, well, you have to go to the soccer field. And I'm like, well, I just spent 7 months in an ice rink. I think Maddie would be more proud if her mom was actually on the soccer field. And she kind of looked at me like, well, no, that's what you do. Like that's, and I'm like, no, you. She goes, well, I don't know how to play soccer. I said, I don't know how to play soccer either. So why don't you go? And when we went to the field, there's just dads. There's just dads coaching little girls. And one mom was there. And these girls are all just staring at this mom. I mean, that's how I think. And the problem, a lot of young girls leave, what is it, statistically at 15 years old, most young women will leave sport. 13 years old. So I think even mentors like moms on a soccer, I know that's maybe a funny analogy to it, but for me it was, my wife should be on the field. I just like I'm contributing, I thought my wife should. And she was an executive at Nike, by the way, so like she was seeing all of this stuff happen as it related to young girls in sport. So.
Well, thank you. Oh, we got one question. One more question. Were you going to ask a question, Trevor?
Hi. I just wanted to add one final point. In fact, sort of speaking to the lady who just asked that question. I came to Canada 25 years ago, roughly. I live in Montreal. Knew nothing about hockey, like literally zero. I've now got 3 kids. My eldest is won the President's Cup with St. John, with Trevor. And my youngest is now playing for Shawinigan today against you guys. So literally, it just shows you, and all we've ever done, I was good at sport, but English sport in the UK, and all we've ever done is taken hockey bags out of the back of the van and give them a hug and say, you know, love you, have fun, enjoy yourself. That's it. And you see kids parents berating their kids and telling them why they didn't make that pass in the first period, why they didn't make that save. It's got to come from the kids. And with the intensity these guys go through, and you know, having to go 4 or 5 times a week, and all the traveling and everything else, it's got to come from the kids. So that would just be my 10 cents. Good luck.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed that discussion and appreciate you making time for us today, and hope you enjoy your stay in St. John. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, everyone.